Hi, I'm Matt from HockeyReviews.ca, and here we have the Vaughn Velocity V10 blocker, and this is the blocker review. So this isn't my set, but this was a demo set that is available at Just Hockey. They thankfully let me borrow this set and use it on ice to do a review on and to talk about the gear. So if you're buying any hockey equipment, whether it be goalie equipment or player equipment, check out the links to them in the description and port them. Let them know you came from Hockey Reviews. It'd be greatly appreciated. So I got a chance to test this glove out with a little bit of a puck machine, which I didn't get footage for. I just tested it for protection purposes, but I tested it out in training sessions and some shinny sessions. I got a pretty good idea of how this plays and uses, and it was actual use. So this is basically a full review minus the whole durability aspect of it and wear point of it. And just to start things off, and we'll kind of go over the parts of this, of just like what's on this glove. I don't have other Vaughn gloves to really compare it to, so we can't really do a lineage thing here, but this will give you a good idea of just some of the features and stuff like that on there and some background on previous Vaughn gloves. So I have had no issues in the terms of how Vaughn gloves kind of feel, and I really liked a V4 glove that I had way in the past. Vaughn has started using carbon in the board, and they used it whenever they started with the pro carbon lines, but people have had complaints about how flexible the entire glove was, how the carbon wasn't thick enough and stuff like that. And I noticed that actually a lot on Vaughn gloves in the past, specifically the non-pro carbons, which obviously don't have carbon, but you could go like this and you could basically bend the board down really badly. And they were the senior level blockers, but that shouldn't happen. And even the pro level blockers, or they weren't as stiff enough in the board. Kind of disappointing. Vaughn, I think, has made huge improvements in this gear, and I know Vaughn and a bunch of companies kind of make slightly different gear for the pros, and they'll have custom options, stuff like that, but this stuff has been honestly pretty impressive, and I really like what Vaughn is doing. And that was kind of the same with Brian's, where Brian's have made some pretty big steps in their blockers as well with the Genetic 5 line or V line. This is kind of similar going down that route, so I just wanted to call that out off the bat. Now, before we begin all that, CoreTech, which are core shorts, and people have heard of these before, they were labeled under Under Armour before. Now Bauer sells hockey specific one, but Core themselves sell their own line of pants and supportive clothing and apparel. Basically, this stuff helps you with growing strains, growing pulls, and helps keep your hips tight and everything like that. And speaking of injuries, I kind of pulled a growing playing in the playoffs a few months ago and have had to keep using these CoreTech shorts to make sure my growing doesn't get worse. When I don't wear them, I can feel it and it hurts kind of to walk the next day. With these, keeps everything nice and tight and keeps everything from stretching out too far and getting injured. So these have been a huge savior for me. Check out the link in the description to their website and use my coupon code that's in there to get a discount, and I'll put it on the screen here. It helps support myself and the channel so I can make content and doing real reviews, but also you get a solid product that I use all the time and basically am needed in order to keep my growing from falling apart. Otherwise, if you want to support the channel without buying anything, check out the links in the description to Patreon and buy me a coffee. Everything through those links always comes back into the channel so I can keep making more content and doing more reviews. So first of all, and obviously most important on the gear, is the graphics. And I always say that jokingly, but I actually love what Vaughn is doing in the graphics department on here. It's simple, but it also really allows you to cut up the different sections. I saw a bunch of people hating on the V10 when it first came out. I think this is a very brilliant designed graphic, and I'm a big fan of it. The reason being, this is one color, this part right here is another, that's another, that's another, then you have these two kind of accent pieces. So if you really want to do something really simple where it's only like one color, like this would be, say for Islanders, this could be just orange and that's all white. You can do that, and all this allows it to be very simple, but also allows you to use a lot of colors. So if you want to do like orange, blue, white, and then this can be something else, right? You can do that because it all is separate, and I think it looks really solid, and you can do some pretty interesting and great designs here. Like I like how these are opposites right here, and it just kind of breaks the colors up a little bit. So I'm a huge fan of what Vaughn did for the graphic package here. Allows a lot of customization and customability. I almost wish that this kind of section would be separate as well, but that's pushing it because it is kind of in here. But you do have these 4 basically massive color sections that you can work with and really do a pretty unique design, even though it's not a custom graphic package. So that is, I think, a pretty great design there. Looking at the side, we can see the interesting shape, and it is kind of a more aggressive curve, kind of like what is on the 1X, or I guess 2-piece Hyperlight now, and less so of this where it just has the very tip. I am a huge fan of this curve shape. I kind of saw something similar. I think the Brian Genetic 5 or V is a little bit more aggressive than this, but I really like the aggressive shape just to help control rebounds. When you're kind of punching like this, you can hit them up here and it kind of punches down, and it also helps a little bit for here to keep stuff from kind of ramping up and just going through. So I'm a huge fan of that shape, and again, pucks like this, that kind of allows it to kind of direct it a little bit nicer. Now, I did get some pucks up here that kind of popped straight up in the air, and that is something that I just totally kind of whiffed on, and it was kind of practice session, so kind of don't really blame the glove for that and me just kind of getting used to it. But I'm a very big fan of this angle shape. Obviously, this is a huge personal preference thing, but for me, I love this shape on these, and I like these a lot more than the flat blockers. Sidewall, nothing spectacular or crazy, but I do like how these are like the details, and there's nylon behind it. You can change the colors of the V10 on the side, which is a small thing, obviously. There's no graphic on here, but I do like how all these kind of logos look on them. But the sidewall, like I mentioned, nothing crazy, just kind of doing generic protection pieces on here, but it also isn't very stiff. As you can see, this is kind of a soft piece, and I don't have a huge issue with this, but I can see how you might want something a bit stiffer there. Now, when you put your arm in there, you get a little bit stiffer, but compared to like what Bauer's doing and some other companies are doing now, where that is a lot stiffer, and the newer ones of these are even stiffer, you don't really have a lot of stiffness here. And again, this is a personal preference thing and something that I don't think is necessarily a negative thing, but with this movement here, if you do try to squeeze kind of in your body like this, a puck can kind of squeeze through there because that it was moving in a bit more. Now, you're obviously going to have all your equipment on, but that movement does allow for a little bit there. Now, for like protection and stuff, you can see there are some puck marks right here. I didn't notice any issues whatsoever, and I tend to make a decent amount of saves like this because I use my stick to kind of block passes a lot when people try and chip them in. So no issues whatsoever on protection here, and they do have a pretty, like, you have this thick thumb pillow right here and that piece, so it is pretty protected all the way through. And I didn't notice anything coming up here, but it's kind of harder to hit your hand in that position. Moving on to this piece right here, you have a pretty nice open cuff design. Back here, obviously, it's just the back part, and it's tied down, so there's no Velcro pulled up, with a very comfy kind of gray or light gray Nash material. Very comfortable blocker palm and everything. We'll talk about that in a second. But I really do like this open cuff design, and there's no Velcro here or anything to adjust this. It just has this elastic to it, but that does allow a lot of flexibility in it. And I've noticed a lot with this glove is it does not get in the way at all when I'm using it, where I have noticed that recently in some gloves. And so that is excellent mobility and open cuff design on there without having to remove the cuff like Bauer has done on some of their new blockers. And I also found that this doesn't really get in the way that much. You can really crank this, but you still have a decent flex there. It is stopping a little bit, but I do like how much movement you have there. And I wear this pretty loose, so pull that back and we'll go like there, and you can see how much movement we got in there. And you kind of look at like these two right here, and this one just is a lot more open and kind of square, so it doesn't like wrap quite as nice, which I'm totally okay with in this case because it doesn't get in the way at all. Where I found this one does kind of interfere with some of my Warrior chest protector, for example. I can feel this a lot more on here. You don't really have any mobility issues with this because it's so kind of down as is, and when you go like this, it doesn't really get in the way that much. It's not as good as what the Vaughn is, but it's not awful. But the Vaughn just kind of takes it to a whole next level, and I really like this design without getting rid of the cuff totally like Bauer has done. Now, speaking of this piece though, and this is where I wish every company would change this, and I don't understand why they don't, but this Velcro, please just swap it, companies. Sticky Velcro here can get caught on your equipment and your jerseys and stuff like that, whereas with this being the soft Velcro, obviously you cover it. Now this is all exposed. If you switch this, so this is all soft Velcro, and this is the sticky Velcro, no matter where you put it, the sticky Velcro will be covered. And like the only way it wouldn't be is if you did something like this, which no one's gonna do. So even on the most loose setting, that will always be covered of sticky Velcro. So please make that super easy change. It's not a lot of effort, and it'd be very nice for that. So moving on to the palm, they have this interesting kind of sure grip, but it's kind of not anymore. We'll talk about that in 1 second. You have this very nice like light gray Nash, like almost ivory Nash on here, very comfortable on the fingers, and like this is a very soft, comfortable palm, and it's on the backhand too. I love putting my hand in here. It feels excellent. I am assuming this is going to hold up okay over time. I haven't noticed a huge issue with this kind of similar material. Almost feels like an AX suede, which I have on player gloves. So I'm going to hope that this lasts long. It feels absolutely amazing, so I'm a huge fan of that. As well as the kind of the materials on the side. These gussets are really nice materials as well. Very soft, very comfortable. And you have some like air mesh right here to allow for some breathability as well, and on here. One thing I love about these gloves is the way that they do their certain fingers. So the pinky finger, you can see, it doesn't have an inner gusset. It's totally rounded. So that way when you kind of go like this, you're always touching the actual like palm material when you're closing your finger on a stick. Same with the index finger. So when you go like this, it's always touching that gusset. So what happens a lot of times is when companies have attachment pieces like right here, it will twist it. So you can kind of see how it's being twisted a little bit, but because of this excellent finger design, it's always touching the stick the correct way. Whereas you have something like this, and you can see how that finger is like getting twisted, right? So if you had that all as one gusset, the gusset's always gonna touch, but because this isn't, gussets kind of end up being on the stick, where this design is excellent and fantastic and unique, and it always allows the stick to be on that finger. On the fingers as well, you do have padded on the back of the fingers like most companies do, so it adds to a little bit more protection on stuff like that, or if you get hit just like here. To talk about this sure grip material, so obviously you have an overlay on here, and it's like basically the whole entire thumb piece, which is supposed to give you some extra grip, and you have that textured design on there. It also, you can see this little yellow piece does have some foam or padding underneath it to help with dampening, and I'm a fan of that. You don't need to feel all the vibrations through your hands, so I like that that is there. Vaughn has done that for a while now, or always. And so this sure grip material, I have heard through the grapevine from a couple companies that sure grip material is harder and harder to come by and doesn't really exist anymore. And this material is not as nice as what the old one was. You can see how like little the texture is. There's not a ton there. It almost looks like it's almost like wearing off all here, or it's just like so thin. And here's like where it hasn't worn off. You can see how thin these dimples are. You can barely feel the dimples. It doesn't do a whole lot in terms of grip from the 3D texture on it. The palm material itself is more grippy than this material is, just from the nature of the material, but it doesn't really feel like it's super grippy compared to other materials. Now, I don't know how the Fave does this. Well, true now, but you can see the textured grip here, and this is a lot more textured, and it's kind of more grippy because of that texture. It also feels just thicker in general, which doesn't really make a difference one way or another if it's better or not, but it does show how this old sure grip material used to be. So Vaughn used to have this material on their gloves, and I called out for how great that material was. I think Brian's has it too, or had it, but this is the new version of it, and it's softer, but it's not as nice in terms of grippiness. And I'm gonna say just overall, I would prefer the true one. Going back into this part over here, because we're gonna talk about some things I'm not a huge fan of, but I understand it. We go to the index finger protection in a second. This little piece right here is a Gen Pro piece on this nylon to help with durability. Now, I hate these pieces now, but at the same time, I can't really complain about it. I hate it because it gets stuck on sticks, and I have to like sand down my sticks to begin with so I can do poke checks and stuff without it getting stuck. This is only for durability, and I can't complain about it because without it, the nylon here kind of rips apart. So you kind of need this in there for that durability. It's just annoying and not a preference for me, and I'm not a fan of it, but I get why it's there. And I mean, it's so the gloves last longer, so it is what it is. The other part that is kind of annoying is the way that this index finger is designed. I can't actually do the trigger finger that I want to do. So when I use my sticks, I basically hold them like this. So my finger goes across the paddle. It just feels better, and my finger doesn't wrap around. Now, because of how this is kind of designed, and it's kind of down here as well, where I can't like stretch this finger out. So even if this goes away like this, I can't stretch this part out far enough to actually get it across the board how I want, and it kind of gets in the way. And to show off what I mean by that, so when I put my hands on here, I want that finger piece to go not here, to go across. So I can't get that across without totally moving the blocker and moving my hand in a very uncomfortable, non-natural position. So that's really awkward. It ends up when I put this on, it slides like that. That's how my finger is. So that's not how I prefer my hand to be, but I can't just turn this out more to where I want it, based just with the glove shape and everything. This kind of gets in the way and stuff like that. So kind of disappointing. It's a nitpick though. It's not the end of the world or anything. It's just something I want to call out because it is something I noticed. Now, when we get to with the stick, we can talk about index finger protection and everything. So Vaughn has kind of a 2-layered system here where they have this piece being a little bit of a tooth right here, and then they have this piece right here. So you can see pretty decent coverage right there. So if you're playing like this, it's probably not going to get into your fingers unless it jams under, which is possible. If it's a really hard shot, it's definitely possible, but you have that 2 layers there, and then really you do have this kind of layer as well to make it the third. This is a pretty solid design. Might not be the best on the market just because there's like no padding in here and stuff to give a little extra protection, but it is very solid and no complaints with it there. Now, when we flip it over though, we see an area I think Vaughn really could improve on, and that is fingertip protection. And I've called this out on companies a while. Vaughn is not the best at it. You can see how tiny these little pieces are. And obviously this should kind of come down more and cover your fingers like this, so your fingertips are more protective. And you can see companies like Bauer who have this massive piece right here, And you can see some changes on newer gloves where like Brian's, it's really slanted on there to really come down and really cover the top of your fingers and your fingertips by coming down. And I love these things when they cover down because I feel like they don't get in the way. It can be kind of hard to pick up your stick with, but Bauer I find is pretty good and it doesn't really hinder anything. But this is kind of disappointing, to be totally honest. I think Vaughn could really do better with this and extend this and make it over. Now, one thing about Vaughn is a lot of their pros have very particular tastes in gear. You could see what happened with like Jonathan Quick with his really old V4, same with Brian Campbell, stuff like that. And I do know there's a ton of NHL guys that don't like this at all. There's some goalies using true gear that don't have the fingertip protection on the new one. It's very old style, so like Premier 2 type of design. And I mean like Premier 2 as in Reebok Premier 2, not CCM Premier 2. So this is something where I get why like Vaughn might be hesitant with it going forward, but I really wish they would change this and make this kind of a multi-piece system or more slanted and with this longer so it comes down like this, or also attach this piece to the tips. So when your tips go down, it keeps following it instead of just getting kind of stuck here, because you can see where this attachment piece is, doesn't really do that much, right? It leaves it kind of hanging around. So it would be nice if this kind of came down like this for more protection. You can make this bigger and attach it that way. So kind of disappointing there. I hope they change this and make this kind of more protective and better while offering to get rid of it as well for the people who don't want it, because again, custom company, they can make old versions of gloves and stuff like that. If you ever hug your post with your blocker and this part kind of wraps around the post, it's right on there. This really helps with kind of making sure your fingers don't get jammed on stuff like that as well, and as well as people digging for pucks when it's like under your blocker and paddle down. And just to show a comparison of what I'm talking about there, you can see how much bigger this one is compared to this one, and even this one could come down a bit more, so this piece could be smaller, but you get a lot more protection and coverage there, as well as here you can see there's none of my index finger exposed there because I can move it on the stick the way I want to, and it's kind of covered that way versus that Vaughn where it's really sticking out there. So this one is the more natural and better feeling in my sense for where my index finger can be, and a bit better clamshell protection. So usually I don't have issues with gloves going paddle down, but I have in the past with Warrior gloves until they fix it for the G6. This is the case here, no issues whatsoever. The one thing I do want to call out though is because this finger is kind of here and not up across it, I did notice it kind of getting jammed a little bit. I noticed that this piece would kind of hit my finger and I had to be a little bit careful about that going paddle down, but that's more because that palm, I can't get my finger across to that palm. Again, just a personal preference thing. People using that trigger grip will have no issues. People going like this will have no issues. I don't know if anyone does that though, but just the way I do it, I did notice it's a little exposed, so I wasn't a huge fan for that. CoreTech, which are core shorts, and people have heard of these before. They were labeled under Under Armour before. Now Bauer sells hockey specific one, but Core themselves sell their own line of pants and supportive clothing and apparel. Basically, this stuff helps you with growing strains, growing pulls, and helps keep your hips tight and everything like that. And speaking of injuries, I kind of pulled a growing playing in the playoffs a few months ago and have had to keep using these CoreTech shorts to make sure my growing doesn't get worse. When I don't wear them, I can feel it and it hurts kind of to walk the next day. With these, keeps everything nice and tight and keeps everything from stretching out too far and getting injured. So these have been a huge savior for me. Check out the link in the description to their website and use my coupon code that's in there to get a discount, and I'll put it on the screen here. It helps support myself and the channel so I can make content and doing real reviews, but also you get a solid product that I use all the time and basically am needed in order to keep my growing from falling apart. Otherwise, if you want to support the channel without buying anything, check out the links in the description to Patreon and buy me a coffee. Everything through those links always comes back into the channel so I can keep making more content and doing more reviews. For rebounds, that's something where Vaughn has always been on the low end of things, and it continues to be here. The board sounds kind of hot and hard, but when you compare it to something like this, the pucks fly off the Bauer blockers, and this one they just don't. This one is a lot more muted and really more close to kind of the true blockers than the Bauer, and even now the Brian's. I'm sure with Vaughn being a custom, you could double thick the carbon in here to make it a little bit more or better rebounding, but it wasn't massive. It wasn't awful either, it just wasn't as big. So if you don't want those big massive rebounds that Bauer offers, this one honestly isn't a bad option. It is a tier below in terms of rebound performance on this. Just doesn't shoot pucks crazy out like other companies do. Personal preference, you have to figure out which one you prefer. For hand position on this, it is kind of in between the extreme low, which I'm gonna say this one is like the extreme low where your fingertips are basically at the bottom of the board comes down, and extreme high where this one your fingers are up more and there's more of the board down lower. So this one's like kind of better for low shots. This one is a much more balanced approach for kind of like pucks hitting here and you be more reactive with this and getting things higher. It comes up higher on your arm this way. This one is very close to what the 2-piece Hyperlight and like the 1X one is, where your fingers are kind of really close here. It just doesn't quite come up as far up your arm, but it's like that much different. So it's so close in regards to that. It honestly feels very close to kind of what the true one is right here, like pretty similar overall. And kind of the feeling of that is really a balanced glove and more control over the glove. So you don't get quite the ability to reach low shots like this one does, because like so much of this falls below your hand and you can really get low, but it allows you to be very controllable with rebounds and kind of where your blocker is going high and everything like that, which leads to the balance on it, which is very, very good. So there's no like ton of overhang like this, and the glove, it's pretty tight in the backhand, so it feels pretty snug as well. But when pucks hit it, you didn't really feel like it going and falling out that way type thing. It felt pretty controlled. Obviously, shots that go lower are harder to control because of the kind of force pushes it this way, but it felt pretty controlled, and like I was confident using it, and it didn't feel like it was all kind of all over the place. And that is a part to do with that hand position. But this blocker, the balance and hand position on it is very solid. It's not quite as extreme low as the old V4s were, I feel. And I remember putting those on and basically your fingertips come past the bottom of the board and the board is so high up. So this one kind of is a little bit more neutral than it kind of comes up the board a little bit, but it feels excellent, and it's an easy recommend if people are kind of looking for that a little bit lower feeling and might not want to go the custom 2-piece Hyperlight route. This is a very good option there. Weight on this glove feels pretty good. It doesn't feel like the lightest, craziest blocker I have, which would be like the Warrior blockers, and like there's a few other companies that are super crazy light, but it's lighter than my Bowers, which are kind of my favorite ones. And this is really well balanced, so the weight is good and solid. And I don't like measuring weights on things because people focus too much on the weight and pretend, oh, that number is all that matters. It's all about the balance, and this on your hand is balanced so well that the weight isn't an issue and it's not getting bogged down at all, and it feels extremely like mobile and movable. While I can't directly talk about durability on this because I haven't used it for that long, Vaughn has, I mentioned previously, done a good job of really kind of beefing up their blockers, and you can see it's not really flexible anymore, where before you could really kind of bend them at will and kind of on the sides. So you're going to get a more durable blocker in that sense. So that's a nice thing that Vaughn has been doing there. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with this blocker. I would happily use it with my set, to the point of if I had a set of this and I was wearing that set and I need to play in an important game, I wouldn't switch this blocker out. I would still use it, and I would be happy to use it with no issues. That's not always the case with a lot of the gear I use. A lot of times blockers I happen to switch out for. This one gets a lot of use for some of my sets, as well as a 1X blocker. But this one, I am very happy with the balance and the feel of it, that I would game it, and I'd be very happy to use it overall. And it's pretty nice, and as long as the durability stays there, so as long as the foams don't break down, which again, hard for me to test because I don't get it for months and months, this is a very, very solid option, and I have no issues recommending it. I love this cuff. The palms are nice and soft and comfortable. Few issues I have with the kind of shape of it, but I'm sure most people won't have those direct issues. It's kind of a nitpick thing, but overall performance is pretty good. I might like to see Vaughn kind of make this a little bit stiffer, but maybe that will come in the SLR line and kind of differentiate the two. Unfortunately, I don't have an SLR blocker to put this side by side, because that would be an easy thing of, if, well, the SLR one is stiff here, this one, the velocity doesn't really need to be, because this isn't their stiff line. So it gives an option of if people want a little bit softerness in this one, so it makes sense for that. So hopefully this video was helpful. Please remember to check out Just Hockey. The whole reason these videos happen is because of Just Hockey, so check them out in the description. Make purchases from there. Let them know you came from me. Be greatly appreciated. If you want to see me review specific sets of gear, let me know in the comments. Also, let the company themselves know and say, hey, I want to see hockey reviews. Review your gear. That would be greatly appreciated on my end. It has helped in the past, so might help in the future as well. Make sure you check out the rest of the Vaughn V10 reviews that are coming out. They will be linked in the description and at the end of the video once they are live. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Links are in the description. If you want to support the channel and you don't want to make any hockey purchases, check out the links in the description too. Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee. Everything through those links always comes back into the channel so I can make more content and doing more reviews.
You're watching HockeyReviews.ca.